The sky tore apart in silence, revealing ships so massive that they made skyscrapers look like toys. The alien fleet had arrived. Across every major city, people gathered, staring upward in awe and terror. No one had seen anything like it. Ships shaped like jagged blades, glowing faintly with a bluish hue, hovering as if gravity didn't dare pull them down. News networks buzzed with panic, and the world's governments scrambled to respond. But deep down, everyone knew Earth had no chance against this. The first attack came without warning. A single pulse of energy shot out from one of the ships, striking a military base in seconds. The entire area was reduced to nothing but ash. Then came the broadcasts. Screens across the planet flickered to life, showing the invaders for the first time. They were terrifying. Tall, muscular, and covered in armor that shimmered like liquid metal. Their horns curved elegantly, and their eyes glowed faintly, radiating superiority. Their leader addressed the humans in a voice that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. "Earthlings," it said, the tone dripping with disdain, "you are small, weak, and insignificant. Your time as rulers of this planet ends now. Bow to us, and perhaps we will let you live as slaves. Resist, and you will be wiped out." For a moment, there was silence. Then, the world erupted into chaos. People screamed, leaders shouted orders, and soldiers prepared for a fight. But the invaders didn't wait. They descended like predators, landing in the heart of cities with weapons that seemed to be alive, blades that extended from their armor, energy whips that crackled with power, and guns that melted anything they touched. The humans fought back with everything they had: tanks, jets, missiles. But it was useless. The aliens moved with inhuman speed and strength, their weapons cutting through Earth's defenses like paper. To them, it wasn't a battle. It was entertainment. They laughed as they crushed entire battalions, mocking the humans for their attempts to resist. "Is this all you have?" One alien warrior sneered, tossing aside a human soldier like a ragdoll. Pathetic. Among the chaos, a small group of scientists watched the invasion from an underground bunker. Their leader, a sharp-eyed researcher, slammed a fist against the table. "We're not going to win this war with guns," they said, their voice trembling with frustration. "We need to think. We need to find their weakness, if they even have one." The room was silent. No one had an answer. But one thing was clear: if they didn't find a way to stop the invaders, humanity was doomed. Meanwhile, the alien warriors continued their rampage. They were a species bred for conquest, born to fight, and trained to dominate. To them, Earth was just another stepping stone in their endless journey of expansion. They took pride in their strength and intelligence, viewing humans as little more than insects scurrying under their boots. But there was something about Earth that unsettled them. It wasn't the humans. They were weak. As expected, it was the planet itself. Earth was vibrant, chaotic, and alive in a way the aliens hadn't seen before. The air felt strange. The food tasted strange. Even the gravity felt slightly off. Some of the warriors dismissed it as unimportant, but others couldn't shake the feeling that Earth was different. Still, their mission was clear: conquer, enslave, and move on. They set up bases in the ruins of cities, gathering humans as prisoners to work in their mines and factories. They didn't care about resistance. It was futile. To the aliens, the humans were already defeated. But humans are nothing if not stubborn. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, pockets of resistance formed. Small groups of fighters, armed with whatever they could find, launched guerrilla attacks against the invaders. They couldn't do much damage, but they refused to give up. Every act of defiance, no matter how small, sent a message. Humanity wouldn't go down without a fight. And then something unexpected happened. A captured human scientist, studying the aliens in secret, noticed something unusual. It was a detail so small that the invaders themselves seemed unaware of it. A biological quirk buried deep in their genetic makeup. It wasn't a weapon or a weakness in their armor. It was something far more personal, something the aliens would never expect. The scientists didn't tell anyone at first. The idea was too wild, too dangerous. But as the invaders continued their assault, the seed of a plan began to grow in their mind. It was risky, it was insane, but it might just work. The invaders laughed at humanity, mocking their weakness and stubbornness. They thought they had already won. But deep in that bunker, humanity's first spark of hope was being lit. And the aliens, so strong, so confident, had no idea what was coming. Beneath the ruins of what had once been a thriving city, the underground bunker buzzed with quiet urgency. The human scientist who had discovered the anomaly in the aliens' physiology paced back and forth, their mind racing. Screens flickered with images of destruction, buildings reduced to rubble, streets littered with the remnants of a failed resistance. Outside, the alien warriors continued their conquest, laughing at humanity's feeble attempts to fight back. But in the corner of the bunker, a discovery had been made, one that might change everything. The scientists turned to their team, pointing at the data displayed on the screen. "Look here," they said, their voice steady but laced with urgency. "This isn't just a random quirk in their biology. It's a design feature, something built into their DNA. They're adaptable." Adaptable. One of the younger researchers asked, their brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" The scientist leaned over the console, typing rapidly. "It means they're designed to survive. Their species doesn't just conquer worlds by brute force, they assimilate. Their biology allows them to adapt to new environments, new ecosystems, even new species." They hesitated for a moment, then added, "including reproduction." The room fell silent. The implications of the discovery hung in the air like a storm cloud. "You're saying?" Another researcher began, but their voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "Yes," the scientist confirmed. "Under the right conditions, they can reproduce with other species. They don't even know it themselves. It's been dormant, unused for generations. But here on Earth, with our atmosphere, our food, our genetics, it's waking up." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the hum of the machines around them. It was an insane idea. It was also their first real chance. "How do we use this?" someone finally asked, their voice barely above a whisper. The scientists straightened, their gaze sharp. "We need a volunteer." Meanwhile, on the surface, the alien warriors were celebrating their dominance. They had taken control of Earth's major cities, turning landmarks into symbols of their victory. The humans who had survived the initial attacks were rounded up, forced into labor camps to work under the harsh supervision of their new overlords. Among the aliens, confidence was high. They had conquered hundreds of worlds before this one, and Earth had proven to be no different. To them, the humans were amusing, a primitive species with no real power or intelligence. The aliens laughed at their attempts to resist, mocking their weapons and their bravery. But for all their arrogance, the aliens were not invincible. They had weaknesses, even if they didn't realize it. Their biology, so advanced and refined, was also their blind spot. They had evolved to be perfect conquerors, but they had overlooked one crucial detail. Earth was unlike any other planet they had faced. Earth was alive. The planet's unique atmosphere, its diverse ecosystems, and its chaotic, unpredictable energy were beginning to affect the invaders in subtle ways. Some of the warriors felt it as a strange restlessness, a sense of unease they couldn't explain. Others noticed changes in their bodies, minor at first, but impossible to ignore. Still, they dismissed these signs as unimportant. They were too busy celebrating their victory, too busy mocking the humans, to realize that the planet they had underestimated was slowly, quietly fighting back. Back in the bunker, the plan was taking shape. The scientists and their team worked tirelessly, analyzing every detail of the aliens' biology. They knew the mission would be dangerous, borderline suicidal, but it was the only chance they had. "This won't be easy," the scientist warned the group. "Whoever volunteers will need to infiltrate the aliens' ranks, gain their trust, and get close enough to trigger the adaptation. The room was quiet. Everyone understood the risks. The aliens were ruthless, merciless. If they suspected even for a moment that a human was trying to manipulate them, the consequences would be fatal. But humanity didn't have a choice. The aliens were too strong, too powerful. Conventional warfare had failed. This plan, as wild and risky as it was their only hope. After what felt like an eternity, someone stepped forward. The volunteer wasn't a soldier or a spy, just an ordinary human with an extraordinary amount of courage. They looked at the scientist with steady eyes and said, "I'll do it." The room erupted into murmurs, but the scientist silenced them with a raised hand. They nodded at the volunteer, respect evident in their gaze. "Then we'll begin immediately. This is our chance. Let's make it count." As the team prepared the volunteer for their mission, the weight of their plan became clear. This wasn't just about survival. It was about proving to the invaders that humanity was stronger than they thought. The aliens laughed at Earth, mocked its people, and dismissed its resistance. But they had no idea what was coming. Deep beneath the ruins of the city, humanity was about to strike back, not with weapons, but with the one thing the aliens had never accounted for, their own arrogance. The volunteers stood in the middle of the dimly lit bunker, their face illuminated by the soft glow of flickering monitors. Around them, the team worked frantically, preparing for what was easily the most dangerous mission any human had ever undertaken. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and yet the volunteer remained calm, their resolve unshaken. "Are you sure about this?" the scientist asked, their voice laced with both concern and admiration. "Once you're out there, there's no turning back. If they figure out what you're doing—" "I know," the volunteer interrupted, their tone firm but not unkind. "But if I don't do this, we're finished. This is bigger than me, bigger than all of us. I'm ready." The room fell silent, the weight of the moment sinking into everyone present. They knew the odds were slim. The alien warriors were ruthless and impossibly intelligent. Trying to deceive them was like trying to outsmart a predator while trapped in its den. But desperation had a way of creating courage, and the volunteer carried the hopes of humanity on their shoulders. The plan was simple in theory, but execution would be anything but. The first step was infiltration. The alien warriors frequently raided human settlements, capturing survivors to use as laborers or, occasionally, as experiments. The volunteer would pose as one of these prisoners, allowing themselves to be taken aboard one of the alien ships. From there, they would have to gain the trust of the invaders. No small feat considering how the aliens viewed humans as little more than insects. The team equipped the volunteer with a hidden transmitter and a small vial of synthetic pheromones, designed to enhance the effect of Earth's atmosphere on the aliens. It was risky, untested technology, but it was the best they had. "You'll only have a small window of time once you're aboard," the scientist explained as they handed the volunteer the vial. "Use this sparingly. If it works, it should amplify their biological response to you. If it doesn't—" They trailed off, unwilling to voice the alternative. The volunteer nodded, their expression unreadable. "It'll work," they said, more to themselves than anyone else. The next day, the volunteers' journey began. They allowed themselves to be captured during an alien raid on a small refugee camp, playing the part of a terrified human. The aliens, as expected, paid them little attention, shoving them into a holding cell aboard one of their massive ships. The air inside the vessel was cold and metallic, filled with an almost oppressive hum that seemed to resonate through the walls. The volunteer watched carefully, studying the aliens' movements and interactions. They were as intimidating up close as they had been on the broadcasts, tall, powerful, and utterly alien. Their armor seemed to shift and ripple as they moved, almost like it was alive. But beneath the surface, the volunteer could see cracks. The aliens were confident, too confident. They barely looked at their human prisoners, treating them as though they were beneath notice. It was a weakness, the volunteer realized, and one they could exploit. Days passed, and the volunteer began to put their plan into action. They feigned fear and submission at first, drawing as little attention to themselves as possible. But when the moment was right, they began to interact with their captors in subtle, calculated ways. It started with small acts, offering to help other prisoners, speaking softly but respectfully when addressed, showing signs of intelligence and resourcefulness. The alien warriors, initially indifferent, began to take notice. One of the warriors, a particularly imposing figure with sharp, glowing eyes, seemed intrigued by the human's behavior. "You're different," the warrior said one day, their tone more curious than mocking. "Most of your kind cowers or cries. But you observe." The volunteer met the warrior's gaze, carefully masking their fear. "Maybe we're not as weak as you think," they replied quietly. The warrior laughed, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the chamber. Bold words for a creature so fragile. "But I like boldness." It was the first crack in the armor, and the volunteers seized it. Over the next few days, they continued to engage with the warriors, subtly planting the seeds of connection. They told stories of Earth, of its beauty and chaos, of its people's resilience. The warriors listened, their curiosity growing despite themselves. Then, the changes began. It was subtle at first, a slight shift in the way the warriors moved, a hesitation in their usually precise actions. One of them complained of feeling strange, their voice tinged with uncharacteristic uncertainty. Another mentioned dreams, vivid and unsettling, unlike anything they'd experienced before. The volunteer knew the plan was working. The synthetic pheromones, combined with Earth's unique environment, were triggering the dormant biological adaptation in the aliens. They didn't realize it yet, but their bodies were beginning to respond to the presence of the human. But the volunteer also knew they were running out of time. The alien commanders were beginning to grow suspicious, their sharp instincts warning them that something wasn't right. The volunteer would have to tread carefully, balancing on the knife's edge between discovery and success. For now, though, they had made progress. The aliens, so certain of their dominance, were starting to see humans in a different light. And the first seeds of change had been planted. The alien ship was a labyrinth of metallic corridors and dim, pulsing lights. The volunteer had spent days memorizing the layout, learning the routines of the warriors, and observing their habits. Every detail mattered. Their survival depended on staying one step ahead, blending in just enough to avoid suspicion, while slowly chipping away at the aliens' confidence. The volunteer had grown used to the cold stares and the rumble of the aliens' voices, but something was changing. The warriors were acting different. It started with the smallest signs, a warrior pausing mid-stride as though distracted, another glancing toward the humans holding cells for longer than usual. These beings, once so rigid and disciplined, now seemed unsettled, almost restless. The volunteer sat in the corner of the cell, careful not to draw too much attention, while quietly studying these changes. Their plan was working. Earth's atmosphere and the synthetic pheromones were taking effect. But the volunteer knew this was only the beginning. One of the warriors, the one who had taken an interest in the volunteer earlier, approached them again. The aliens' glowing eyes were intense, but there was something else in their expression now, a hint of curiosity, perhaps even hesitation. "You've been quiet," the warrior said, their voice a low rumble. The volunteer looked up, feigning a mixture of fear and defiance. "What do you want from me?" The warrior tilted their head, studying the human. "You're not like the others. The rest of your kind cries or screams or tries to fight back with your pitiful strength. But you observe. You listen. Why?" The volunteer hesitated, choosing their words carefully. "Because fighting you is pointless. You're stronger, faster, better equipped. But that doesn't mean I'll give up. Maybe I'm just waiting for my moment." The warrior laughed, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the chamber. But there was no malice in it this time. "Waiting for your moment. Bold words for such a fragile creature. They leaned closer, their sharp, alien features illuminated by the soft glow of the ship's lights. "And yet I find myself curious about you." The volunteer's heart raced, but they kept their face neutral. This was the opening they needed. Over the next few days, the interactions between the volunteer and the warrior grew more frequent. The alien, once so aloof and indifferent, began asking questions about Earth, about humanity, about what it meant to survive. "You humans," the warrior said one day, pacing in front of the cell, "you're weaker than almost any species we've conquered. And yet, you resist. Why? What's the point of fighting when you know you'll lose?" The volunteer stood, meeting the alien's gaze through the bars. "Because survival isn't just about strength. It's about hope. About knowing that even when everything seems impossible, you can still fight for a better tomorrow. That's what makes us human." The warriors seemed to consider this, their glowing eyes narrowing. For a moment, they almost looked conflicted. Meanwhile, the changes in the alien crew were becoming more pronounced. The warriors, once united and disciplined, were beginning to show signs of unease. Arguments broke out over trivial matters, and some of the aliens reported strange dreams they couldn't explain. One warrior approached the commander, their expression unusually tense. "Something is wrong," they said, their voice low. "The humans, their presence is affecting us. I feel different." The commander dismissed the concerns with a wave of their hand. "You're imagining things. Focus on the mission. The humans are irrelevant." But the cracks in their armor were widening. Back in the cell, the volunteer knew time was running out. The alien commanders were growing suspicious, and the effects of the pheromones were becoming harder to hide. One warrior, in particular, seemed to be struggling with the changes the most. The same one who had taken an interest in the volunteer. During one of their conversations, the alien admitted something that caught the volunteer off guard. "I've started dreaming," they said quietly, their voice almost hesitant. "Dreaming?" the volunteer asked, feigning curiosity. The warrior nodded. "It's strange. I've never experienced anything like it before. I see colors, shapes, memories that aren't mine. And you're there, always there." The volunteer's breath caught in their throat, but they forced themselves to remain calm. "Maybe it's your body adapting to this planet," they suggested, keeping their tone neutral. The warrior frowned, as though trying to piece together a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. "Or maybe it's something more." The tension aboard the ship was reaching a breaking point. The warriors were struggling to maintain their composure, their once unshakable confidence eroding as the strange effects of Earth's atmosphere continued to take hold. The volunteer knew they had to act soon. The changes were accelerating, but so were the aliens' suspicions. If the commanders discovered the true nature of what was happening, they would kill the volunteer without hesitation. But for now, the seeds of doubt had been planted. The once mighty alien warriors, who had laughed at humanity's weakness, were beginning to question their own invincibility. The volunteer looked at the warrior standing before them, their expression unreadable. "You think you're stronger than us," they said quietly. "But strength isn't just about power. Sometimes it's about adaptability, about finding a way to survive when everything is against you." The warrior stared at them, their glowing eyes filled with an emotion the volunteer couldn't quite name. And for the first time, the alien didn't laugh. The alien ship hung in the Earth's orbit like a predatory shadow, its sharp edges and glowing panels exuding dominance. Inside, however, the atmosphere was anything but controlled. The volunteers' plan had worked better than expected, perhaps too well. The alien warriors, once a seamless unit of strength and authority, were unraveling. Tensions were boiling over, arguments erupting between crew members who had never shown signs of dissent before. And in the midst of it all, the volunteer watched quietly, knowing they had lit the spark that could burn down the invaders from within. The warrior who had taken an interest in the volunteer visited them again, but this time they looked different. Their imposing confidence was gone, replaced by something almost human: uncertainty. "I don't understand what's happening," the warrior admitted, standing outside the volunteer's cell. Their voice, once steady and commanding, now held a slight tremor. "For my entire life, I've known who I am, what I am. But since coming here—" They hesitated, their glowing eyes narrowing in thought. "Everything feels wrong." The volunteer stepped closer to the bars, their gaze steady. "Maybe you're starting to see the truth." The truth. The warrior's voice hardened, but their posture remained tense. "What truth could your kind possibly show me?" "That you're not as invincible as you think," the volunteer said calmly. "That maybe, just maybe, your strength isn't the only thing that matters." The warrior stared at them, their expression unreadable. Then, without another word, they turned and walked away. Elsewhere on the ship, the alien commanders were growing increasingly agitated. Reports of strange behavior among the crew were flooding in. Warriors complaining of vivid dreams, unexplained emotions, and a growing sense of unease. "This is unacceptable," one commander growled, slamming a fist against the table. "We are the strongest species in the galaxy. These humans should not be affecting us like this." Another commander, more cautious, leaned forward. "Perhaps it's the planet, its atmosphere, its unique biological makeup. We underestimated it." "Then we need to act quickly," the first commander said, their tone harsh. "Eliminate the humans aboard this ship and complete the mission. We cannot afford to let them weaken us any further." Unbeknownst to them, one of their own was listening, a warrior who had begun to question everything. The volunteer knew the aliens' patience was running out. The warriors' commanders were ruthless, and it was only a matter of time before they decided to eliminate all humans aboard the ship, including the volunteer. But the volunteer also knew they weren't alone. Among the warriors, cracks had formed: doubt, hesitation, and something even more surprising: connection. The warrior who had spoken to the volunteer earlier returned to their cell that night. This time, they carried no weapons, no armor, only questions. "Tell me about your people," the warrior said, their voice low. The volunteer blinked, caught off guard. "Why do you care?" "Because I don't understand you," the warrior admitted, their tone almost vulnerable. "Your kind should be weak. You should be easy to conquer. And yet, you resist. Even now, when all hope seems lost, you don't give up. Why?" The volunteer hesitated, then spoke. "Because we've learned that survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about finding strength in unexpected places, in hope, in community, in adaptability. You look at us and see weakness, but maybe it's the kind of strength you've never needed to understand." The warrior's glowing eyes flickered, as though processing something profound. "You speak as though you're better than us," they said, though their voice lacked conviction. "Not better," the volunteer replied. "Just different." The changes in the warriors were becoming impossible to ignore. One by one, they began to experience emotions they couldn't explain: empathy, curiosity, even guilt. These feelings were foreign, unsettling, and yet they couldn't stop them. For the warrior who had grown close to the volunteer, these changes were especially intense. They found themselves questioning everything they had been taught: their superiority, their mission, even their purpose. In a moment of weakness, they confided in the volunteer. "Our kind has conquered countless worlds. We've never faced anything like this before. What is it about your planet that's doing this to us?" The volunteer smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not the planet. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're realizing that strength isn't about domination. It's about connection." The warrior fell silent, their mind racing with thoughts they couldn't suppress. Meanwhile, the alien commanders were preparing for drastic action. Their scans had revealed the source of the changes: Earth's unique environment combined with prolonged exposure to the humans aboard the ship. "We need to neutralize the humans immediately," the lead commander declared. "And if that doesn't work, we may have to leave this planet altogether." But as the commanders issued their orders, A quiet rebellion was brewing. Some of the warriors, including the one closest to the volunteer, were no longer certain of their mission. For the first time, they were beginning to question whether their empire's way of life was truly right. In the dead of night, the warrior returned to the volunteer's cell one final time. "I don't know what's happening to me," they said, their voice trembling. "But I can't follow orders anymore. Not after what I've seen. Not after what I felt." The volunteers stepped forward, their voice steady. "Then help us. If you truly believe in change, prove it." The warrior hesitated, their glowing eyes searching the volunteer's face. Then, with a deep breath, they nodded. "I'll do what I can." For the first time since the invasion began, the volunteer felt a glimmer of hope. The cracks in the alien's facade were no longer just cracks. They were fractures. And soon, the entire foundation might crumble. The alien ship was no longer the well-oiled machine it once was. Chaos had begun to seep into its corridors. Warriors who once moved in perfect unison now argued in hushed tones. The commanders, though maintaining a facade of control, were visibly tense. The tension in the air was almost suffocating. The volunteers sat in their cell, watching the activity outside with a sense of quiet determination. Their plan had worked far beyond their initial expectations, but the most critical phase was yet to come. The volunteers' ally, the warrior who had begun questioning their orders, was now their only hope of turning the tide. The warrior paced back and forth in their private quarters, their mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. They had always believed in the strength and superiority of their kind. But now, they couldn't shake the feelings that had taken root within them, emotions they had never experienced before. The conversations with the volunteer replayed in their mind. The human's words were simple yet powerful, planting seeds of doubt in everything the warrior thought they knew. What if they're right? The warrior whispered to themselves, their glowing eyes flickering faintly. What if strength isn't everything? A knock at the door startled them. Another warrior entered, their expression grim. "The commanders have ordered the execution of the humans. They're saying the longer we keep them aboard, the worse things will get for us." The warrior's heart sank. "When?" "Tomorrow," the other warrior replied. "They've already begun preparing." The door closed, leaving the warrior alone once more, their hands clenched into fists. They had to act now, or everything would be lost. Back in the cell, the volunteer heard the soft hum of the force field deactivate. They looked up to see the warrior standing there, their face set with determination. "Come with me," the warrior said, their voice low. The volunteer hesitated, studying the alien's face for any hint of a trap. But something in their expression told the volunteer this was real. They stood and followed the warrior out of the cell. The corridors were eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of machinery. The warrior led the volunteer through a series of back passages, avoiding the main areas of the ship where other warriors might be. "Why are you helping me?" the volunteer asked softly. The warrior didn't look back. "Because I can't ignore what I've seen, what I felt. Your words, they've made me question everything. And if I'm questioning, maybe others will too." The two arrived at a small chamber filled with equipment. The warrior gestured for the volunteer to wait as they accessed a control panel. A holographic map of the ship appeared, glowing softly in the dim light. "We don't have much time," the warrior said, pointing to a section of the map. "This is the core control room. If we can disable the ship's main systems, it will cause enough confusion to give you a chance to escape." The volunteer frowned. "What about you? If the commanders find out you helped me?" "I'll deal with that when the time comes," the warrior interrupted. "Right now, we focus on getting you out of here." The volunteer nodded, their resolve strengthening. Together, they moved toward the control room, their footsteps echoing softly in the empty corridors. As they approached the core, the warrior suddenly stopped, holding up a hand. Voices could be heard around the corner. The volunteer pressed themselves against the wall, heart pounding. The warrior peeked around the corner, then turned back to the volunteer. 2 guards, they whispered. Stay here. Before the volunteer could protest, the warrior stepped into the corridor. They approached the guards casually, speaking in their native language. The guards seemed distracted, nodding as they responded. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, the warrior struck. The first guard crumpled to the ground before they could react. The second managed to draw their weapon, but the warrior disarmed them with a swift movement and delivered a final blow. The volunteer watched in stunned silence as the warrior gestured for them to follow. Inside the control room, the warrior quickly began working at the main console. Alarms flashed across the screen as they bypassed security protocols. What are you doing? The volunteer asked, watching as the warrior's hands moved with practiced precision. Overloading the power systems, the warrior replied. It'll shut down the force fields and scramble the ship's navigation. They'll have no choice but to retreat. The volunteer nodded, stepping closer. How can I help? Just watch the door, the warrior said. Minutes felt like hours as the volunteer stood guard, listening for any signs of approaching footsteps. Finally, the warrior stepped back from the console, their face grim but determined. It's done, they said. We need to move. Now. As they made their way back toward the escape pods, the ship suddenly lurched, the lights flickering. A loud mechanical groan echoed through the corridors as the systems began to fail. The alarmed shouts of other warriors filled the air, but the confusion worked to the volunteer and their allies' advantage. They reached the escape pod bay without encountering resistance. The warrior activated the pod's controls, then turned to the volunteer. This is your chance. Once you're gone, they'll have no way to track you. The volunteer hesitated. Come with me. The warrior shook their head. I can't. If I leave, they'll know I betrayed them. But if I stay, I might be able to make others see what I've seen. Maybe, one day, we'll change. The volunteer placed a hand on the warrior's arm. Thank you. For everything. The warrior nodded, stepping back as the pod's door closed. The last thing the volunteer saw before the pod launched was the warrior standing tall, their glowing eyes filled with something new. Hope. The escape pod rocketed through the vast expanse of space, leaving the alien ship in chaos behind it. The volunteer sat strapped into the seat, their heart racing as they watched the massive vessel shrink in the distance. They couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and worry. Relief that they had escaped, and worry for the warrior who had risked everything to help them. Outside the pod's small viewport, Earth grew larger, its blue and green hues a welcome sight after the cold, metallic confines of the alien ship. The pod's systems hummed steadily, guiding it toward the surface. As the volunteers stared at the planet, they couldn't help but think about how much had changed. They had boarded the alien vessel expecting death or subjugation. Instead, they had planted seeds of rebellion within an empire that seemed unshakable. On the alien ship, the chaos was reaching its peak. The overloaded systems had caused a cascade of failures. Lights flickered, gravity fluctuated, and navigation controls became unresponsive. The commanders barked orders, their voices sharp with panic, but their efforts to restore order were in vain. In the midst of the confusion, the warrior who had helped the volunteer moved quietly through the corridors, observing the disarray. Their decision to stay had not been easy, but they knew it was the only way to truly make a difference. If they could show others that the humans weren't the weak, inferior species they were made out to be, maybe change was possible. They found themselves in a room where several warriors were arguing, their voices filled with uncertainty. What's happening to us? One demanded. Why are we feeling these things? This isn't who we are. Maybe it's who we've always been, the warrior said, stepping into the room. Their calm, measured tone silenced the others. What are you talking about? Another warrior asked, their glowing eyes narrowing. I'm talking about the truth, the warrior replied. We've been taught to believe we're superior, that strength and domination are the only paths. But what if we're wrong? What if there's more to life than conquest? The room fell silent as the warriors exchanged uncertain glances. For the first time, the warriors saw something they had never seen before in their comrades' eyes: doubt. Back on Earth, the escape pod landed softly in a remote clearing, its systems automatically deploying parachutes and cushioning the impact. The volunteer unstrapped themselves and stepped out, the fresh air filling their lungs. The warmth of the sun on their skin felt like a miracle after the cold, sterile environment of the ship. A group of humans approached cautiously, their faces a mix of awe and relief when they recognized the volunteer. "You made it back," one of them said, their voice trembling. The volunteer nodded. "I made it, but the fight isn't over." They quickly recounted their experiences aboard the alien ship, the cracks in the warriors' unity, the seeds of rebellion that had been sown. "They're not as invincible as we thought," the volunteer explained. "They can change. They can feel. And if we can exploit that, we might have a chance to turn this war around." The group listened intently, their expressions shifting from despair to hope. For the first time since the invasion began, they saw a glimmer of light in the darkness. On the alien ship, the rebellion was quietly spreading. The warrior who had helped the volunteer continued to speak to their comrades, sharing their doubts and the truths they had learned from the human. Slowly but surely, more warriors began to question their purpose. The commanders, however, were not blind to the growing unrest. They doubled down on their efforts to reassert control, issuing strict orders and harsh punishments for any sign of dissent. But the harder they pushed, the more resistance they encountered. In secret meetings, small groups of warriors began to discuss the possibility of breaking away from the Empire altogether. "If the humans can teach us this much," one warrior said, "what else have we been blind to?" The volunteer, now back on Earth, worked tirelessly with other humans to prepare for the next stage of the fight. They knew the alien empire was vast and powerful, but they also knew its greatest weakness: the humanity it had unwittingly uncovered within its own ranks. Messages were sent out to other human resistance groups, sharing what the volunteer had learned. "We don't just need to fight them," the messages said. "We need to reach them. Show them there's another way." It wasn't an easy plan. Convincing an enemy to abandon their ways was far harder than simply fighting them. But the volunteer believed it was the only way to ensure lasting peace. Months passed. The alien ship remained in orbit, but its actions became increasingly disjointed. Raids on Earth grew less frequent, and reports of internal conflict among the aliens spread. The warrior aboard the ship continued their quiet rebellion, gaining more allies with each passing day. They knew it was dangerous, but they also knew it was necessary. One day, as they stood looking out at the planet below, another warrior approached them. "You think this will work?" The warrior turned, their glowing eyes filled with determination. "It has to. Because if it doesn't, we'll never be free. None of us." On Earth, the volunteer looked up at the sky, where the alien ship still loomed. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The fight for humanity's survival, and for the soul of the alien empire, was far from over. But for the first time, it felt like a fight they could win.